We have always been the kind of guys that would hang around in Hooters. Since it was becoming too monotonous for us, we decided to make a change from our regular place and switch to another place. Many suggested Tilted Kilt Eatery, but we were not really into the steaks they served. But then we decided that Bombshells had to be another place we hang out at, and we decided to visit the nearest Bombshell. It was a nice place, and the servers, they were prettier than the Hooters we were in and more voluptuous and erotic. We appreciated the physical beauty of women. We were not the kind of guys that hid the fact that some women are pure goddesses when it came to the physicality of how they looked. It wasn't anything creepy, but it was something that people didn't really understand until we explained it to them, and it was so easy for people to get offended by the way we looked at them. But it was different than people would really think the way we perceived them. We headed out to this Bombshell in LA, and the girls there were like the angels of the Los Angeles. We ordered our steak and stuff, and it was Veronica that brought us our food. She had dark hairs and really curvy figure. She had a birthmark on the right side of her cleavage that looked like a heart, and when she walked, people went into this euphoric daze just seeing her walk. I remember being hypnotized by her eyes and the fragrance she used. It wasn't something ordinary. It wasn't your boring Chanel or Claire de la Lune. It was something a mystic would potion in Middle East. I was in awe, and she asked, "Is there anything else I can get you?" And I remembered being an idiot in the amazement of her saying, "I want you to bring me a cup of coffee every day I wake up." She smiled at me and went away, and my friends just looked at me in the utmost cringe, and they all said together, "You are an idiot." We all had our meal, and I remember all the time I was meeting eyes with her, and she was with me. It was almost as if I was in love with her and she was somewhat in love with me. The moment we finished our meal, I saw a guy holding her hand in aggression. I looked at it and called out her name and said, "Veronica, can you get us our bill?" She looked at me and her eyes were kind of saying, "Thanks," and she came with the bill, and I asked if she was all right. She looked at me and said, "Yes." It was the most hesitant yes I'd ever heard. She went away with her eyes down. Then the previous guy from the previous altercation held her hand aggressively again, and then got up and went to the parking lot, and Veronica followed him. I picked up my friends and told them about what was going on, and told them to hurry up and move to the parking lot. Even though my friends won't waste another opportunity to make fun of me, they knew that I was serious when they decided to follow me to the parking lot, and one say, "We hurried," and we saw that the guy grabbed Veronica and threw her off in the van. We hurried towards our cars and followed the van, and it was an abandoned warehouse that the van drove to. And as soon as he got out of the van, my friends and I jumped at him without any doubt and started thrashing him. I broke them away and told them to hold the asshole while I brought Veronica out of the van. Her face was tied by a handkerchief and she was in tears. The moment she was freed, she looked at me, started crying, and hugged me. We tied the guy to the van as I comforted Veronica. And then she said, "Archie's a guy I met in college. We became friends and then he tried dating me, but I never wanted that. Then one day he came to my dorm and forced himself upon me and made a video, and ever since blackmailed me. I managed to delete the video, but then today he said he had another video and somehow managed to get me here. He wanted to kill me today, but thankfully you were here." She held me tightly and I said, "Well, he is here. He is tied. Tell me what you want me to do with him, and it shall happen to him." She looked at me crying and I said it was all right. She was safe. And then she told me, and for the next few hours in that abandoned warehouse, we did nothing but torture that piece of shit of a man, took his confession for everything he has done. The confession and everything was sent to the police, and his photos of torture and humiliation were saved. And there were many moments of embarrassment that were recorded in that torture, and we promised him that we will make his life hell if he ever tried to hassle any girl in his life. We forced on him the trauma he could not have imagined, and we could see in his eyes the fear he had. Even Veronica did not hold herself back from doing things to him, things of nightmares. And then, after a few hours and many time passing out from the pain, we released him in the forest, threw away his keys somewhere in the forest, just the last bit of our torture. We never imagined what came next. We heard next morning that a man was mauled by a bear in the forest, and when we saw the photograph, it was the same man. And then when we discussed this on our first date, Veronica said about the article, "Good riddance." My friends and I don't go to Bombshells anymore, not since we all got married to all our partners. I married Veronica only after 6 months of dating. We knew we were meant for each other the moment saw each other the first time in that Bombshell.
At some point when I was high school aged, I was with my grandfather and a couple of cousins at Burger King on a Sunday afternoon, all dressed in our Sunday best. We ordered our food and everyone was trying to get their drinks. I was standing there waiting since I didn't know where we were going to sit when an old man walked up to my male cousin and started talking to him out of nowhere. But while he did this, he made a direct eye contact with me that he didn't break for a good 20 to 30 seconds. I have never seen anyone else ever stared so intently at a person they weren't even talking to. We sat down and ate with the old man sitting with an old woman a few tables over. He then got up mid-meal to get something, and as he walked by our table, he purposely and noticeably walked slower while staring at me. I didn't look up and acted like I hadn't noticed while secretly dying inside. Before we left, it looked like the man wanted to talk to my cousin again, but we got out before he could even get a hold of him. Once outside and in the car, I asked my cousin what the man had said to him, and my cousin told me he was talking about the girl behind the register and that he wanted to ask her when she graduated from high school so they could go on a date or something. It wasn't even about me at all, as I had suspected originally, but it still let me know where his intentions laid. He was dubbed as the Burger King man. And a few weeks later, we went to the same Burger King. After we were done eating, I was throwing away my trash. I noticed the same man loitering around the restaurant. My grandpa wasn't ready to leave yet though, as he always had to get a drink refill. But I tugged on my cousin's arm and told him we should go. And when we got outside, I told him that I saw the Burger King man again. He said he saw him too, and it looked like he was going to try to talk to him again. What this man's deal was with sharing things with my cousin, I have no idea. But I haven't gone back to that particular Burger King since I'm not interested in encountering a creep again. At least I find the story kind of funny now, since my cousins and I got our own cryptid out of it. Beware of the legend of the Burger King man coming to a franchise near you.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Back in my high school years, I'd often meet with a few friends at a local Dunkin' Donuts, which was conveniently near a railway we'd all take to our weed guy's house. My closest friend at the time, Katie, and I usually met up earlier than everyone else just to hang out, order our extra large drinks and hash browns, and attempt at some "hey mister" shenanigans to score some tall boys from anyone willing to buy us beer. I'd consider us to be pretty naive and overall nice girls, which never proved to be an issue to either of us, until we were nice to the wrong person. Now for a little background of my hometown. I grew up in the forgotten borough of NYC, Staten Island. For those who are unaware, there was, and kind of still is, a pretty horrendous opioid epidemic, so seeing zombie-like civilians strolling the streets is fairly common. Because of this, I became pretty good at spotting out someone struggling with heroin and things of the sort. On this day, Katie and I met up at Dunkin' and sat at our usual booth. We were in the midst of messing around with our phones and being our overly giggly selves when I noticed out of the corner of my eye someone suddenly stop outside of the glass door, still smiling. I glanced over to see if it was maybe one of our friends, and ended up making direct eye contact with a basic Staten Island-looking dude. I looked away unbothered and just carried on. Just another customer anyway. After the guy got his coffee, he sat directly at the table across from our booth. I chose to ignore the fact he sat weirdly close and resisted eye contact, since that already awkwardly happened. But I guess the motion caught Katie's attention, as she looked over her shoulder at the man settling in. She looked back at me, made a face that said, okay, and we just giggled and tried to move on. Every now and then, I glanced in his direction, mainly just because I like to be observant of my surroundings, but also because I kept seeing him scratch his nose, neck, and face in my peripheral vision, and noticed he was bleeding from various little cuts on his body. This was a dead giveaway he was doing some form of opiate, as they tend to get very itchy and scratch until their skin breaks. A few minutes later, the man asked if one of us had a charger he could borrow. I kindly denied, and Katie only had an iPhone charger, while the man clearly had an Android phone. This slight exchange was enough for the man to feel invited, and he'd continue to make comments for quite some time. Being that this was around 4 years ago, I don't remember the entirety of the conversation, but I do remember him often asking general questions like if we lived around here, what we do on our free time, and creepy things of the sort. I was pretty vague yet polite in my responses, but Katie was always a bit more enthusiastic in her words, making it pretty easy for this guy to reciprocate and basically join our conversation altogether. In Katie's innocent stupidity, the guy basically found out some of the main train stops we'd get off at to hang out in the area. He also found out we would indulge in the devil's lettuce, which only made this guy feel even more inclined. At some point, he mentioned how his ex-girlfriend got him into some trouble, got him into heroin, which he used to sell, served jail time for, and pretty recently got out. He also mentioned how he'd been an ice cream truck driver ever since his release, and told us that he's always driving around the train stops Katie mentioned earlier. He also, repeatedly, offered to give us rides around his truck someday, with free ice cream as the bribe. We were pretty naive and overly nice girls, Katie more so than I, so one thing led to another, and eventually, the guy was asking for Katie's social media, which she more than happily obliged. She's always been really dedicated to expanding her following count, you see. Through this entire exchange, I was mostly nodding, smiling, laughing here and there, so me remaining silent during this social media exchange went unnoticed. However, once the guy started following Katie on Instagram, he quickly found mine through a tagged picture on her page. I wasn't private at the time, so he immediately started liking and commenting on nearly every one of my pictures. The comments were extremely cringy, consisting of heart eyes, water squirt emojis, and things like, "Damn, man." Finally, after the longest half hour, I urged we really should be catching our train. Fortunately, the man wasn't persistent after that, and we were on our way back with no problem. After some verbal recap of what happened, I convinced Katie to block him and I did the same, and we brushed it off at that. I honestly forgot about that strange interaction, until about a week later. I was hanging out with some friends at a park near my high school when Munchies made me crave Ralph's ice cream, which was just up the block. I ventured off with one other friend and almost made it to the store before the sound of an ice cream truck approached from behind us. Completely lost in conversation, my attention was only caught by the high-pitched screeching of the truck's brakes and a somewhat familiar voice. Of course, it was him. He shouted at me, but with Ralph only a couple of feet from us, I ignored him and rushed in with my friend. The guy didn't stick around, being that he was blocking the whole lane on a narrow two-way road, but we still called our friend at the park to pick us up in his car. For the next 2 weeks, there were about 4 times this man tried to pick me up in his truck. At this point, making me pretty paranoid, as I was potentially being stalked. The last time it happened, he was parked directly outside of one of the train stops, almost as if he was waiting for me. He called out, asking why I blocked him, and saying he just wanted to be friends. At this point I'd had enough, told him to just leave me alone. My dad's a lieutenant, which was a lie but slipped out in my defense, and walked away before he could reply, and entered the diner, where I was meeting my friends that night. I saw his truck drive away in the window, and never had an interaction with the ice cream man again. The sound of an ice cream truck has haunted me ever since. I'm going to take you back a few years to when I was working at McDonald's. For context, at the time, I was a 16-year-old female. Now at the McDonald's I worked at, when you are on headset, you answer people at the drive-thru. You are normally required to be at the first window to also take payment. My job position was customer care manager at the time, so my job was to be on the front desk, but 99% of the time, they required me to be behind tills. So I was having a normal day, working a long shift, but having a normal work day. I happened to be on headset, and first window that day too. My headset buzzes, letting me know there's someone at my drive-thru lane. I go through to the first window to answer my customer, and this is how the conversation ensued. "Hello, welcome to McDonald's, what can I get you?" "Oh wow, you got a beautiful voice." His voice was grunty and husky sounding, not off-putting. We have all sorts of customers come through McDonald's every day, so it didn't give me the creeps or anything. "Thank you, sir, how very flattering. What can I get you?" "I haven't decided yet." There's a long pause here. "Can I come to the first window to decide? I want to see who I'm talking to." Now, we weren't very busy at this point. The creeper hadn't actually creeped me out. I mean, all he'd done was pay me a compliment, and we quite often had people complaining that they preferred face-to-face contact, so this certainly wasn't out of the blue or unusual. "Yeah, sure sir, that's fine." "Wow, you're as beautiful as you sound." "Thank you sir. Have you decided what you're going to order?" "Are you an option?" I laughed nervously at this. It was my first job, and I wasn't the rude kind of person where someone was paying me a compliment. I must also point out this guy must have been in at least his 60s. I remember he had one lazy eye that looked to the left, painfully awful teeth, and patchy dark brown hair. At this point, I was a little bit uncomfortable, but was still more than willing to take his order. "I'll have a cheeseburger." "Okay sir, that'll be 99p. Are you paying cash or card?" Without answering my question, he started asking me where I'm from, how old I was, etc. But it wasn't until his last question that I got super weirded out. "What time do you finish work?" 7:30, why? I didn't actually finish at 7:30, but 7:30 was the first number that came into my head when I blurted it out. I finished at 8 and would probably do some overtime too, but I wasn't about to let him know that. "I can meet you if you want. I can pick you up outside and we can go somewhere." All the while he's saying this, he has this horrendous grin on his face and keeps winking at me. "I'm really sorry, sir. I'm not allowed to meet customers outside of work. It's against employee policy." This was utter bull, but I needed him to leave me alone, and he carries on being insistent, but not getting the picture, and I cut the conversation short. "Anyway, sir, sorry to be rude, but can I have the 99p for your cheeseburger?" "Ah, yes, sorry. See you at 7:30. Off he drove to the next window, and I was gobsmacked. I'd already said I wasn't going to see him. I was a little bit shocked, but was not going over there to give him the satisfaction of talking to me again. My coworker came to me and said, "Ew, that guy had a major crush on you. I wanted your number, but I didn't give it to him. He's old enough to be your dad, if not older." Anyway, I explained exactly what happened and how uncomfortable it made me. 7:30 came around and my coworker spooked. The creeper was actually waiting in the car park for me, just like he said he would. He sat halfway down the car park, and you could see him just staring in. Our car park wasn't very big. It only had 4 rows of parking spaces, so he wasn't that far away, and would have clocked me the minute I walked out the door. At this point, I'm freaking out, and head to the back of the store where hopefully he can't see me. I had to stay in the back of the store for 40 minutes before we knew it was safe to come out. Fast forward a week and Creeper is back on drive-thru, And guess who's back on headset at window 1? Me. I heard his voice and recognized it straight away. I was hoping I'd hear your voice again. Why didn't you meet me the other day? 1 second, sir. I'll be with you in 1 second. I immediately handed my headset to my manager and gave him a quick briefing of the situation. He gladly took the headset and dealt with the customer from start to finish. When my manager came back to me to let me know he'd gone, he said the creeper had been asking my name, my address, and my surname. My manager said he was the most creepiest guy he'd ever met, and I was never to have anything to do with him again. If he came back to work while I was there afterwards, my manager would have to head me to the back room while he dealt with him. He still asked about me every time. So to the creepy McDonald's guy, let's never meet again.
I was 19 years old at the time. I had a really good opportunity to go to college, but things fell through a couple of months into it, and basically, I wasn't allowed to go back at that college. I'm not going to go into the details, but I found myself stuck. I was living at home with my parents and working at McDonald's most of the time. I was really disappointed in myself, especially because I didn't have anyone else to blame but myself. I seemed to be your typical college dropout that ended up working at fast food. But while I was working there, I had a couple of really strange experiences. So the first one happened like this. There was this really creepy customer. He was an old man, and he just seemed like the most insane individual ever. You just have to think of the physical embodiment of Florida Man. He always wore this bathroom robe with a stained white t-shirt underneath. Or shoes. He had these really old Nikes that seemed like they had been completely covered in mud and never washed. Everywhere he stepped, there was some residue coming off of his shoes. I don't know how far he lived, but this guy came in to eat at McDonald's 4 or 5 times a day for as long as I worked there. I never personally had any horrible experiences with him. It wasn't like he was this unruly customer. He always asked for extra ketchup, but it's not like that was a crime or anything. The story is weird because I remember talking about him with some of my coworkers. I had one friend there that I became rather close with. I remember talking with her about this creepy guy that had just came in to eat McDonald's all the time wearing his pajamas. When you work with the public, there are so many people and faces that you see all the time, and none of them mean anything. It's just another customer. But when you have someone like this, it almost makes the job a little bit more bearable. As weird as that might sound, a little bit more consistency to the job. Plus, making jokes about someone like that was kind of fun. But there was one day when the jokes weren't funny anymore, because he stopped coming in. They couldn't find out why either. I mean, when you see someone multiple times a day, every day for months on end, you get a little surprised when they stop showing up. It all just seemed, I don't know, unusual. I remember talking to my friend about it. Neither of us could imagine why he stopped. I remember getting a phone call at 2 a.m. that night, though. I guess my friend had gotten curious and looked around online. She's a bit of an insomniac. I guess he had been arrested on multiple drug charges. She had found a picture of him in the public database for our county's police department. In the mugshot, he was wearing that exact same bathrobe that we always saw him wearing. That was interesting. Really weird to think that someone I saw and interacted with multiple times a day was an actual dealer. But I guess that was that. My other experience working at McDonald's was really bad. Not going to lie to you, it really freaks me out and really made me question humanity. So it happened like this, right? I was working the graveyard shift. It must have been around 12 a.m. and we didn't have any customers. We already cleaned all the machines as much as we could, and there really wasn't anything to do. We lived in a smaller community, so there weren't too many people coming in to eat at such a late hour. We had a few here and there, but we were mostly just sitting around, particularly slow this night. I remember going over to check the garbage cans for the other side of the store. Occasionally, we would forget to empty that garbage pail. It was directly behind a booth and out of sight from the area we normally worked in. I remember going over there, and there were 2 big bags of garbage that needed to be taken out. They were too heavy to take out at the same time, so I did what any sane person would do, I carried one out at a time. I remember bringing the first one. I threw it into the dumpster, and I remember hurting my back a little when I did it. I went for a little bit of a theatrical throw and really felt it there. I went back into the store to get the second bag of garbage, and I made my way outside. I got about 10 feet away from the dumpster when I saw something that shocked me. I dropped the bag of garbage. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a mutilated puppy. Its entire snout had been cut off. I wasn't sure if it was alive or not. It wasn't moving or anything. I took a step closer to try to see a little bit more, and I just felt my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen in person. It was definitely dead. It wasn't leaning up against the dumpster, and it was just a horrifying thing to see. I ran back inside and asked my coworkers what we should do. We decided to call the police, but they didn't really help much. We were really freaked out at who could have possibly done this and why they would put the puppy there of all places. And the part that still freaks me out is that whoever had done this had been waiting for me to go back inside of the building, and in the few seconds before I came back out, put it right next to the dumpster. I figured they must have been watching me. Didn't know what else to think about it, though. Our McDonald's didn't have an outside camera other than the drive-thru, so there was no hope of trying to identify the person that did this. But it still makes me sick to my stomach to think what that person could be like.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all this support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.